At issue this Sunday morning, finding a long-term funding solution for SEPTA. What role can the business community play? And can anything be done to ease traffic congestion in the sports complex after games and concerts? I discussed that and more with the new board chair of the Greater Philadelphia Chamber of Commerce. Plus, poll positions. A new survey is out in the race for New Jersey governor, and we're crunching the numbers.
NBC10 at Issue starts now.
I'm Lauren Mayk. Welcome to NBC10 at Issue. There is a renewed push to make sure SEPTA and transit agencies across the state have the funding they need to keep service on track. This past week, commuters, activists, and local officials held a rally in Center City. They're demanding changes on SEPTA after days of delays and cancellations. Right now, SEPTA is in the process of inspecting 200 of its train cars after a series of fires on the tracks in recent months. Since the inspections started, commuters have been dealing with delays and cancellations because of fewer trains available.
The federal government had to step in and force SEPTA to pull unsafe cars off the tracks because they were too dangerous to ride. That is what decades of disinvestment looks like.
Earlier this month, the NTSB issued a warning to SEPTA, urging them to update their fleet of rail cars. This came after 5 fires involving the transit agency's Silverliner 4 trains. One local business leader has ideas about how to address SEPTA's funding issues and other transportation concerns. Christopher Franklin is the new board chair of the Chamber of Commerce for Greater Philadelphia. He is also CEO of Essential Utilities. Welcome to NBC10 at Issue.
Thanks for having me.
So let's dig in and solve all of the problems of the region and the state. Now, I won't put that all on you, but let's talk about what really can be done and what the impacts are. And I want to start with SEPTA, which this region really saw a lot of drama in Harrisburg and locally. It's caused pain for commuters trying to get to and from work and school. What were your thoughts as you have been watching all of this play out with SEPTA over the past few months?
Well, at the heart of it, we need a long-term solution for funding for SEPTA. And really, it's about how do we come to that common solution, right? The House of Representatives, the Senate, they had solutions. They both passed bills that had funding for SEPTA, long-term funding for SEPTA. They just weren't the same. Somehow we've got to get those solutions to come together and have a long-term solution for SEPTA. We just can't go up there every 2 years and beg for money to fund our regional SEPTA.
So a long-term solution is not what SEPTA ended up getting. Do you feel like what they ended up getting is good enough or sustainable for this region?
Yeah, listen, it was what could get done at the time. But what we've advocated for at the Chamber is some use of that public transit fund for short term, just to get everybody back. And they are all back now, so we're getting children to school and we're getting employees to work. But really what we need is a long-term solution. And I don't think we can wait 2 years. This funding solution lasts for 2 years, but I think we need to be right back at it, and we need to have that conversation going. It's why the Chamber and SEPTA have agreed to immediately begin monthly meetings, discussions about what that solution could look like. And we've now had legislators who have offered to be part of those discussions to help craft it so we could bring something to the legislature that maybe would be acceptable to everybody.
You know, during the negotiations, I did see, when the Chamber came out and made that recommendation for using this particular funding. But throughout the process, as they were talking about where money would come for a long-term solution, I was sort of surprised that I didn't see more businesses in the region, not just in Philadelphia, but even in counties surrounding Philadelphia that rely, for example, on regional rail, individual businesses stepping up and saying, hey, this is a problem for me and my employees. Was there a hesitation, given sort of all the political machinations in Harrisburg? Was there a hesitation, you think, among businesses to say, hey, guys, red light, this is a problem?
I didn't sense a hesitation, but it really is often an insider's game. So in other words, there are very few people who are actually at that table in the negotiations. And so it's really about who do we call and when do we call them, and then whose solution. And I think where you may have sensed the hesitation is because the House is from one party and the Senate is from another party, and they had two different solutions. It was hard to know where to play and not get burned. And so I think maybe that may be some of the hesitation that you've observed. But all in all, the business community was united in, let's get a long-term solution here and let's get it done.
You are sort of at the crossroads, though, of part of the debate that has been going on when you have lawmakers who are not from this region, whose constituents, quite frankly, don't rely on SEPTA or maybe even any of the other transit agencies that we were talking about. But then you have Democrats from the Philadelphia area trying to make the point that the revenue from Philadelphia, that the business in Philadelphia is so important to the rest of the state, which is kind of, why I say you're kind of at where that crossroads is. Did you have conversations with Republican leader Pittman, for example, or others from outside of this area to try to make that point to them?
Absolutely. And I think the takeaway from those conversations is we don't have to choose between roads and bridges and mass transit. We should do them all, right? People who are navigating their way through the state who don't have mass transit should also have transportation needs met, right? And so this shouldn't be an or, this should be an and. And I think that's what many of the legislators really understand, that we need to do rural roads and bridges, as well as here in Southeast, but we also need mass transit. A lot of them didn't understand until I gave them the statistic. 44% of Philadelphia residents commute to the suburbs every day for work. 44%. So that means this is not a city issue. This is really a regional issue in the Philadelphia region. And that's one of the reasons why I think we need to have business community and legislators, county commissioners. Everybody needs to be engaged in this solution to make it work.
Is there a source that you think maybe should get some more attention that's not?
Well, listen, skill games is probably a part of the solution. Whether that's enough to handle the mass transit needs across the state or not, I think is debated. But maybe there's other opportunities. Listen, I've heard local sales tax being thrown around by some legislators. So I think there's ideas.
For the region that basically uses SEPTA, essentially?
That's right. That's right. Could you raise local dollars? I don't know that that's a viable solution or not, but there's a lot of people who are thinking about this every day, and staff up in Harrisburg who think about these things and impact.
What do you think the business community's response would be to something like a sales tax? What kind of economic impact would that have?
Well, I think it would be the size of it, right? Listen, in Allegheny County in western Pennsylvania, there's already a sales tax increment above the statewide sales tax. So it's not a novel idea, but if it would solve the long-term issue here on mass transit, people might think it's an idea that could work. Look, we can't put all these cars on the road. You can't shut down the R5 or the Paoli-Thorndale line, right? I know we pay $60 million a year to Amtrak to run that set of tracks, and that's incredibly expensive, and maybe there's something we could do long-term with that, but you can't shut it down and throw all those cars on the roads. The Schuylkill Expressway was outdated when it was built, right? There are too many cars today for the Schuylkill Expressway. You're not going to put a second deck on it. You must have mass transit.
Well, let's stick on the topic of cars on the roads and talk about cars in parking lots, which is another thing I wanted to talk to you about, because you're taking a look at what can be done when folks go to the stadiums and try to make their way home. And that experience, first of all, how did you land on that as something that you think you should take on?
So it's funny, as I talked to people about that I was going to become the next Chamber of Commerce chairman, they said, and I said, well, what are the issues in the region that you're interested in? That one just kept coming up. Can't we do anything at the stadium complex to get out of that complex after a game or a concert in a reasonable amount of time? And so I thought, this is something that's achievable. And so I began to talk to my good friend Dan Hilferty, who is president of Comcast Spectacor and obviously over the Flyers. involved with the Sixers and all the owners. And it turns out that the owners were already thinking about this, and work was already being done. They hired one of our, I would say, town fathers, Bill Hankowski, who ran Liberty Property Trust and is really involved in PIDC over the years. And Bill's helping them formulate a plan to get cars out of that stadium property in a short term, right, with a short-term plan to make it better, and then a long-term plan, which includes building ramps onto I-95 and the Schuylkill Expressway. But this short-term idea could be big, and I really hope it works.
I want to dig in that a little bit more. I should also mention that Comcast is the parent company of NBC10. So what would be the next step for that?
Yeah, there's a 9-point plan that the owners have worked on, and that 9-point plan includes things like computerizing the traffic signals. We all know that that doesn't always work well down there around the stadium complex. It includes more civilian traffic people to support the Philadelphia Police Department. As we know, our police department is understaffed today. We're looking to hire more police, but today they're understaffed. So to help to supplement the good officers that work down there.
They would work for the police department, or they would just be a supplement working for some other part of the city?
Yeah, that would be up to the owners if they would work for the stadium complex or they would work for the city in some fashion. And then it's how do we better corral the pedestrian population? As you know, in those parking lots, people walk between the cars, and it's really hard to move your car. And then better signage. You know, people who go down maybe to a concert a year or a couple of games a year, they don't always know where is the exit. And so cars are going all ways inside those parking lots. And if you could start to move those vehicles all in the same direction, all these things together, I think, could really make a meaningful difference for people's quality of life getting in and out of those stadiums.
All right, we'll have to leave the conversation there for now, but we hope to have you on again. Good to talk to you, get your thoughts, and let us know how those conversations go, both at the sports complex and also with SEPTA.
Will do. Thank
you. Christopher Franklin, board chair of the Chamber of Commerce for Greater Philadelphia. Thanks for joining us.
Thank you.
State of the race. There's a new poll out in the race for New Jersey governor. We'll go inside the numbers and tell you which groups of voters are backing each candidate and whose voters are more enthusiastic.
This is NBC10 at Issue.
We're back now on NBC10 at Issue with a look at Decision 2025. The race for New Jersey governor remains one of the most closely watched contests in the country. The latest Quinnipiac poll of likely voters finds Democrat Mikey Sherrill leading Republican opponent Jack Ciattarelli 50% to 44%. The poll was conducted from October 9th to the 13th and has a margin of error of plus or minus 3.6 percentage points. Joining us now to discuss this latest poll is Quinnipiac University polling analyst Tim Malloy. Thanks for taking time to speak with us.
Very happy to be here.
So what does this latest poll tell you about where this race for New Jersey governor is right now?
This race is combative, it's very close, and it's very consequential. A 6-point lead is really not much of a lead, which Sherrill has at the moment. She's lost 1 point in the last 3 weeks since we recently polled. So you're looking at a really important race. It is the whole nation is looking at, and it's really close.
Let's dig into these numbers a little bit and talk about where these candidates are getting their support from, because there are some differences that you're finding.
Yeah, Mr. Ciattarelli is stronger in the shore areas, the ex-urban neighborhoods. In other words, the neighborhoods that go beyond the the first neighborhoods, more out toward country. And Sherrill, of course, does very well in suburban and urban. So that's sort of the meat of it. I think you got to look at the how the debates went to really get a feel for where this thing really is. It's gotten a little bit ugly, and then perhaps Trump is going to enter the fray. So you're looking at from the standpoint of a political junkie or a pollster, this is fun to watch and very interesting.
And you are finding also differences when it comes to women voters and men voters.
Yeah, that is important. Sherrill has many more women voters than her opponent does, and her opponent has more men, but not nearly as many men as she has women. So you're looking at a woman who's very strong with women likely voters. We're not doing registered voters now. We're doing the people who are going to vote. So yeah, that is a good thing for her.
And one of the questions you asked is interesting, and you ask about enthusiasm. First of all, why is that something that you want to measure? Why do you ask about that?
Yeah, enthusiasm eventually translates into who shows up at the polls. So when Mr. Chitterelli does better than Cheryl does, that's good for him, and he did. There's more voter enthusiasm on the Republican side as far as getting out to vote and showing up on election day than there is on the Democrat side. Doesn't mean it's a broad division, but it should be encouraging to the Republican candidate that he's ahead of her on that one.
When we look at the favorability and unfavorability of these candidates, and we see with both of them that their unfavorability has been rising, what is typical for what you find in polling as we get closer to election day and as people get to know candidates? Is that a typical thing that you see unfavorability rising?
Usually it stays about the same throughout, unless there's some, possibly, again, I go back to possibly the debates. And remember, favorability isn't just approval of, will they do a good job? It's, do I like the person? Do I trust the person? It's one of those umbrella polling words. So, yeah, I've not recalled sinking that much watching that happen, but I'm sure it's happened in the past. This has been a very, very volatile race. And of course, with the Philly and New York TV stations and everybody in between in Jersey, everybody's seen this. I mean, these are the big markets. So I just think people are tired of combat, and that may come into play.
Let me ask you about what you found on some issues. Both candidates have their own strengths on different issues, but in some cases, voters really aren't giving an edge to one over the other. What did you find on these issues that you polled? Yeah,
I'm going to just look at notes now, but if you're handling state schools, Cheryl slightly up, handling the transit situation. Mr. Chitterelli is a little down. The state's economy, Chitterelli actually gets better numbers. It is pretty much a wash. The one we've really seen, which I think jumps out, is honesty and empathy. And in that case, Cheryl comes out ahead. Now, we asked that question because there were concerns about the impact of the so-called scandal of the Naval Academy and what that would do to her. We found that it didn't hurt her in this last poll. Her numbers did not go down on that particular key part of the character of a candidate. So she came out of that, at least with our numbers, doing okay.
Yeah, and of course, then it all goes back to how many voters are voting on these particular issues to see whether those things are going to help or hurt the candidates. Yeah,
and everybody's got their own issue. Here's another one, and I know you were going to ask me. Housing is, of course, the dinner table conversation and the concern for so many hundreds of thousands of New Jerseyans. It's not a toss-up on that. Mr. Chitterelli would do better as far as keeping prices from getting worse. I mean, both have a problem with this going in because it is the big issue. But I think they see the businessman may be more capable of getting a grasp on something that's of great concern to people who live in New Jersey.
All right, well, we'll have to wrap it up there for now. Quinnipiac University polling analyst Tim Malloy, thanks so much for taking the time to talk to us.
It was a pleasure.
All next week, I'm taking my Battleground Politics series on the road across New Jersey as we talk to voters and local leaders about choosing the next governor. There's just a little over 2 weeks until Election Day. I'll be speaking to the people who will decide the race. Look for my report starting tomorrow afternoon on NBC10 News, and we'll recap the trip next week on NBC10 at Issue. The impact of the Pennsylvania state budget impasse, how the lack of state funding is affecting organizations that rely on this money to help victims of domestic violence.
This is NBC10 at Issue.
The Pennsylvania state budget impasse in Harrisburg is having an impact on organizations that depend on state money. As NBC10's Tracy Davidson shows us, programs that serve domestic violence victims are now having to lay off staff because of the lack of funding.
There are about 2,500 workers at domestic violence programs at risk of losing their jobs. And so those folks are essential to providing competent services to people who need it. And domestic violence should be considered an essential service and therefore funded, even when there's a budget impasse.
Susan Higginbotham is the chief executive officer of the Pennsylvania Coalition Against Domestic Violence. State money flows through her organization to the 59 agencies serving survivors across the state.
Right now, the state of Pennsylvania owes domestic violence programs nearly $11 million in funding. And so not having that money is putting great stress on domestic violence programs that serve Pennsylvanians every single day.
On Friday, the Pennsylvania Treasurer's Office offered a bridge loan to cash-strapped organizations, saying they can apply for 25% of their state allocation received last year.
There's a bit of a catch because it would come with a 4.5% interest rate. And on that amount of money, it would be about $260,000. And that is something that domestic violence programs cannot absorb.
Tracy Davidson, NBC10 News.
The money that was loaned plus the interest would have to be paid back within 10 days of state funds being released. That can only happen when a state budget is passed. But Higginbotham says the loan is not a viable solution. Well, new school restrictions could be coming for students when it comes to cell phone use. Coming up, the bill elected officials in one part of our area are proposing that could keep devices out of the hands of kids.
This is NBC10 at Issue.
A proposed law could affect teens across Pennsylvania. A bipartisan group of state senators have introduced a bill that would force all schools to ban student cell phone use during the school day. Each Pennsylvania school district would be responsible for coming up with a plan for how to restrict students' possession of their phones while they are in the school building. The bill makes exceptions for students with medical conditions or individual education plans that require a phone. Well, if the bill becomes law, Pennsylvania would join 27 other states that restrict phones in school. Lawmakers in New Jersey and Delaware are considering similar bans. That does it for this edition of NBC10 at Issue. Thanks for joining us. Have a great day.